Welcome to the Higher Love with Megan podcast with me, your host, Megan Cooper, a holistic coach and trauma-informed practitioner. This podcast seeks to break out of the echo chamber of societal narratives that perpetuate our institutions and challenge the status quo of wellness and beyond. Join me as we decolonize our minds, address and use our privilege, and prioritize inclusivity. Here, diverse experiences are honoured, and together we are fostering a space that stands for higher love for all. As a listener, you are not just here to passively consume. You're an ambassador for deep healing and societal evolutions, ready to engage in thought-provoking, challenging conversations. As your host, I'm committed to providing ever-expansive spaces that inspire us to contribute to a world defined by higher love. Thank you for joining me on this journey. Up on the podcast this week, we have Calli Popham. Calli is a senior yoga teacher, a TRE practitioner, which stands for Trauma Releasing Exercises, co-founder of yoga and movement studio Flow State in Hove, and founder and lead teacher of Embodied Beings, an embodied yoga teacher training school. She shares embodied, creative, injury-based practices and is passionate about shifting the landscape of yoga. Thank you, Calli. Thank you so much for your time and your energy being here today. It's so great to have you, and I've been really looking forward to this conversation for a while. So yeah, really pleased to have you, and welcome to the episode and welcome to the podcast. So I'd love to kick off with you just telling us a little bit firstly about who you are, what you do, and how you got into yoga. When did that journey start for you?
Okay, so I'm Calli Popham. I am a senior yoga teacher. I am a TRE practitioner, so a trauma releasing exercises practitioner. I co-founded the yoga studio Flow State in Hove, and I also founded an embodied yoga teacher training company that I am the lead teacher of. I'm also a mum of two amazing children and a wife and all those other wonderful things. So I keep myself busy. And yoga-wise, so it's been a winding journey for me yoga-wise. I recall the first time I ever made yoga shapes was when I was about 7 or 8 years old. My mum was a traveller. She was a hippie. She was a yoga practitioner as well. And I grew up around in a red bus called Rosie. And we travelled Europe and spent a lot of time at festivals where I started to see lots of adults doing yoga and those kinds of practices taking place way before it was a thing or cool. And so I remember from a very young age doing Padmasana, lotus pose, and copying all these postures. And that kind of interest stayed with me for a long time. And then I think when we settled into a house, I grew up in Glastonbury in Somerset. And I went to my first official yoga class when I was about 14 or 15. I think that would have been my first class. It was a hatha class and very held and stuck and funny. I found it as a 14, 15-year-old girl, I found it all hilarious. But there was something that stuck. And after that, I got into Ashtanga and practiced Ashtanga then for most of my life up until doing a teacher training in my late 20s. So yoga's been part of who I am for as long as I can remember, really, in a myriad of ways. I remember even at 18 being like, how can I be a yoga teacher? This is what I wanted to do. I just felt so called. But in that time, I was just like, there's no way that you could make a living from doing that. There's no way that is an option. And fast forward, being in my 20s, the age-old kind of life crisis, spending too much time on the dance floor and working in a soulless corporate job that was destroying all my creativity. And then a bit of burnout took me to do my yoga teacher training. And I think everybody I speak to has a very similar story when it comes to coming into teaching yoga. And so took my first teacher training and started teaching from there, basically.
Amazing. Yes, I have a totally similar story. I used to be an insurance broker in my past life and then quit in my late 20s and started teaching yoga. And that 12 years later, it's taken me on the journey that I've been on. So yes, very similar story. I'm curious how your practice has evolved over the years, because obviously you brought in the TRE element and the way that you work in a much more embodied way. I'm just curious how that practice and teaching has evolved for you.
So hugely. It's coming from a very strict Ashtanga practice and being someone that kind of came to yoga very much for the physical element in my sort of teens and 20s. I have done a full 360 with both my practice and my teaching, and it probably started, the unraveling and the unlearning started maybe about a decade ago. I think the first book I picked up, I remember spending a couple of years just being like, oh, I'm going through the motions, but it's just, there's something that's not connecting for me. There's something, I didn't feel like there was a space for me back then in the world. This is going back quite a long time when there wasn't loads of yoga teachers in the world, and I wasn't vegan, and I still like to go on the dance floor. And so I was in this sort of phase in my life where I was like, I have so much passion for this practice, but I felt there wasn't a space for me. So I found Stretch, became good friends with Carl and Sophie, and me and Carl wrote a teacher training together. And it was together that we started unraveling and unpicking everything we'd inherited from teacher trainings that we'd done. And really starting to go on the journey of actually what needs to stay and what actually in this modern world is relevant, and how can we start to really align those things. So one of the first books that completely started to change the trajectory of my practice was Awakening the Spine by Vanda Scaravelli. And her, I think the fact that she was one of the first female voices that I had read on yoga and the traditions of yoga, I think was really key, because she brought in that feminine aspect of not pushing, not forcing, not overriding the wisdom of the body. And although the practice, and obviously she came from that lineage, that there was the beginnings, there was a ripplings of something more than the shape, something more than overriding the body. And I was riddled with injuries from doing very strict practice, and so I was really looking to evolve that. And so she was the first kind of teacher that I was like, now this is starting to make so much sense. This is what I'm about. And so I started teaching more around gravity, levity, rebound, the waves of the spine. And so that was where it all began about a decade ago. But still, the shadow of everything else that I'd kind of became just habituated within me. And then there was another book called Intelligent Yoga by Peter Blackaby, who's also Brighton-based. That was another book which then really brought in the nervous system and the wisdom of the nervous system and more functionality to the movement rather than it being that shape-based practice. So those two books were like the first kind of ripplings of me moving towards a more inquiry-based practice. And then I found, if I was to have a guru, it would be this person, Bonnie Bainbridge Cohen, I found her about 8 years ago and started to deeply explore all of her work. And that's when I was like, okay, this is where it's at for me. So looking at embryology and how interconnected we are with nature. And so my embodied inquiry-based practice really started to come through from there. And it's just continuously evolved and grown, changed, as I have as well. It's been a long time coming from late 20s to early 40s. It's like the evolution of being a human, a woman in the world has been vast as well. But my teaching couldn't be further away now from where it began. And I think that's so normal, isn't it? And I say we're always evolving. And now my passion is, how can I help teachers teach in this way, this more embodied way, this nervous system informed way, this trauma informed way? Because I feel passionate. This is what the world needs. It doesn't need shape makers. It doesn't need people in the splits. If you want to do splits, that's absolutely fine. But like, where's the heart? Where's the soul? Where's the passion? And trying to bring that in. So it's been a long, beautiful, winding journey. And I always say when I teach trainings, when people come to me and they've done previous other types of teacher trainings, I'm always saying it's going to be much more unlearning than it will be learning. It's this practice of realizing that there isn't one way to do anything. And as a human that is inherently part of nature, we're never going to look, feel the same, make the same shapes in the same way. And it's like recognizing that is really crucial.
Yeah. Beautiful. I love that. And I can resonate so much to the evolution of your yoga practice and the way that you hold space, also with you as a human as well. When I first started teaching yoga, or when I first got into yoga in my early 20s, I was completely wedded to hot yoga, Bikram, and this is the way that you did it. And I would do it twice a day and let fire go. And it was like, why would anyone ever do something like yin yoga or restorative yoga? What's the point? And when I started teaching yoga, it was all power yoga. And then now, a good old 12 years later, I'm like, if anyone wants to put me in like a restorative, I'm all here for it. So yeah, I can completely, that journey is always such a beautiful one. I'm curious how the TRE element came in for you as well.
Yeah. Oh, I presume you've done TRE.
I have, yes. Not so much, but I've done little bits, and maybe actually it'd be good to define what it is for people who don't know what it is.
Yeah, of course. So TRE it's ultimately a somatic, body-based trauma and tension releasing practice. What it does in simple terms is it moves through some really simple sets of sort of physical exercises to help the body come into what's known as neurogenic tremors, which are ultimately the shakes that the body does naturally. And what those shakes do with our natural way in which to diffuse tension, stress hormones from stressful situations. And for me, it's just the most incredible, profound, beautiful practice, both to do for myself, but when I share it with other people, I never, ever cease to be completely mind blown. It's just beautiful. I recently shared it on a retreat, and so many people are so skeptical. Understandably, because they're like, oh, my body's not. At the beginning of the practice, I'll show them my shakes. So we'll lift the hips and then my body's off doing its thing. And they're like, that's not going to happen for me. And then we go and they're like, and they have these incredible, profound experiences where something clears, or they have maybe an emotive response, or just they feel like a completely different person. And for me, when I started practicing TRE, maybe I think 6 or 7 years, my journey of TRE started 6 or 7 years ago. And I remember, as someone who's quite fizzy, a neurodiverse person, even yoga practices, like I need to move. And I've always found it really hard to sit in meditation, and I've done it and I've forced myself to have these meditative practices. And what I've learned is actually meditation doesn't have to be still. And actually that was such a freeing thing for me, is to realize, like, to let go of the shame of finding it difficult to be still. And knowing that actually the body in its very essence is moving and pulsing and rhythmic, and actually trying to override that. And again, it's that shadow, it's that kind of hangover of the old way of doing things, and actually realizing that it doesn't have to be that way. And TRE was that journey of, for the first time ever, being like, oh my God, this is what it feels like to be regulated, to be a regulated human being. And I hadn't realized I'd been running around London, those sort of late 20s, early 30s years, running around London, teaching multiple classes a day, cycling everywhere on my bike, practicing, and then hadn't realized that I'd probably spent most of my life in a sympathetic nervous system response. Know what it was actually to be grounded and regulated. It wasn't part of my understanding back then. And so for me, TRE completely changed my experience. It was the moment that I realized this is what it actually feels like to be on a level, like on ground zero, like really regulated in my body and connected. And from there, as soon as I did it, I have to learn to share this with other people. There's just no way that I can keep this for myself. And went on a journey of training. And I think it was the recognition of just how, and what I try and teach other people now is like to actually be aware of what your different nervous system states feel like for you. What is it to be regulated? What is it to be in a sympathetic, mobilized place? What is it to be dissociated? How does that actually feel? Because until I'd really learned about the polyvagal theory and experienced it in myself, I didn't actually know that I was dissociating a lot. I was in a sympathetic nervous system state a lot. So it was such an incredibly profound experience to have that realization, and to know that actually until you do a practice like that, a lot of people just, they don't know. They don't know that they're spending their whole time stressed and in a stress response because they don't know any different. Yeah.
Totally.
Hence that we are in the goal.
I haven't done loads of TRE. I've done lots of different somatic practices, but I've only done TRE a few times. And it's funny you mentioned the skepticism thing, because I do all sorts of things. I've done all sorts of things. So it's funny when my skepticism still shows up. But I was like, a few exercises to stretch, and then I'm going to lie down and shake. Come off it. That's not going to happen. So I was personally amazed. But it is such a powerful practice. And I love the way, I have a very rudimentary understanding of TRE. So I'm not going to speak to it with any type of authority. But the thing that I loved about it was that it capitalizes on a very innate natural response of the body's way to regulate itself, which is really the opposite way to how I guess we're taught to be as humans, but also taught to be within a lot of practices like meditation or yoga, where it's coming into stillness. But actually, for a lot of people who are quite dysregulated, somebody is suffering from an anxiety attack or experiences anxiety or is in a state of shock or stress, the body will physically be moving to discharge that tension from the body. And it capitalizing on something that just feels, it's that whole unlearning thing, or like remembering thing. You're like, of course, it makes so much sense that when I release this from my body, it feels clearing. And just to build on something that you said about how you used to, it was all about being in that still trying to be regulated, but probably not regulated place. And then realizing that actually being more embodied, being more in this somatic experienced way was actually the way forward, especially taking into account things like neurodiversity. And actually for a lot of people, being still in meditation is really difficult. Or for a lot of people who maybe got PTSD or have been through severe trauma, it actually doesn't feel safe to be fully still. And I know for me that as a teacher, many years ago, I was probably saying things that were quite alienating or excluding for a lot of people. And I'm just curious to build on that, what you said. Is there anything that there are probably many things, but are there things that stand out to you that you used to do, that you used to say that you wouldn't now, that you don't now in the way that you teach?
Yes. Yeah. Like you say, so many things that I used to say that just wouldn't come into, even to the point of insisting that someone closes their eyes.
Yeah.
I don't do that now. I'll invite people to close their eyes, or I'll give them an option to soften their gaze and look somewhere, because like you touched on, if someone's got PTSD or CPTSD, it might not feel safe for them to close their eyes. And so insisting on that, or getting frustrated at the person that's having their eyes open, even something that simple, is just so then allowing space for people to have their own experience. And so I think that's the biggest shift. Rather than go through all the things that I don't say anymore, I think the biggest shift is really trying to ensure that I'm using language and invitational cues that allow whoever is in the room, I hope, to feel inherently safe in their environment. And I will do practices to help them with that. We'll do like head turning, gazing around the room to make sure that they're orienting to their environment. Also, very much the language that I use. There was once a time years ago where if I saw what I thought was a room full of ladies, I'd be like, oh, hi, ladies. And I try never to presume now that everybody in that room identifies as female. So it's like the smallest things that all add up to just continuously doing my very best to make sure that nobody feels unincluded, nobody feels like they don't belong there. And I think that's the power and the importance of that inquiry-based practice, is even from the most subtle of our cues and the things that we say, from a polyvagal lens, it's that continuously looking to try and create an environment of safety so that people can have an embodied experience, so that they can feel free to move and be in a body. Because, and I always teach this when I'm teaching teachers, like not everybody feels safe to be in their bodies. Yeah. Again, languaging around, oh, come to the safe place of your body or something like that. It's even things like that I really avoid saying, because you cannot presume that a body is safe for someone. And actually inviting people into their bodies is such a profound healing tool, but it has to be done gently, and it cannot be done. Some people, it's not been a safe space for whatever reason. And my practice and my work and what I try and do is like just treating that as like, can we come in? How does it feel if you feel this? Finding a sense of safety in yourself. Where is that? Rather than trying to be directional with where people should feel things or how they should feel. I guess that's been the biggest shift. And so many things that, you know, years ago, I would say, and it makes me cringe now, the light in me honors and sees the light in you. Namaste, hand-wringing, kind of yogi. And the whole journey of the language that I use, and even saying namaste at the end of a class, I've been really trying to explore that, different meanings of namaste, making sure, obviously, because the West brought in that meaning, and of the light in me sees the light in you, and it's not the translation. And, you know, I've always been a bit of a yogi rebel. I question everything, which is why I've got to where I am and why I share the way that I do, is because I'm like, yeah, but why? And why do we do that? And that doesn't make sense for me, and that doesn't feel good for me. So why? I need to understand it. And I think it's also my neurodiversity. When I look back, because I was late diagnosed, it's the reason why I teach the kind of practice that I teach, which is continuous, fluid, embodied. You know, I don't, even when people come and lie down at the beginning of the class, I'll get them to move, I'll get them to roll around, stretch, before I ask them to be in any way still. And never at any point do I say, I might say, find a sense of stillness, or find something that feels still to you. And that might still be, or if you still need to move, you still move. And it's invitational, so that people can just be as they need to be. And there's no shame and there's no guilt, because I think there's such a stigma, or there's always been such a stigma attached, hasn't there?
Yeah, totally.
So many things.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that's so helpful, just picking out a few things. And they are massive things that make a massive difference. And for me, teaching trauma-informed workshops to people over the past years, and really having to look at the language that I use around closing your eyes, around coming into stillness, around making it much more invitational and much more cued towards permission and safety, has been, yes, so illuminating for me, I think, as a space holder. And yeah, one that I'm very pleased to have gone through, and sounds like you are too.
Yeah.
I would just love to ask you now, just to transition the conversation more towards a kind of broader wellnessy yoga industry as a whole. You've obviously been on a huge journey as a teacher. You've been in this space for a long time. And I know that you and I are quite aligned on some of the ways that we see certain things. It's a massive question, so you can take it in whatever way you want to and whatever wants to come forth. But in your opinion, what do you feel really needs to change within the wellness, within the yoga industry right now?
It's a big question. So for me, the wellness industry has, even before the sort of last year or so, the very term wellness industry has always made me feel a little bit icky. And the reason, I think, is because the vision that instantly comes up is, obviously, when I think of wellness, and I'm sure I'm not alone, will be very slim, probably white woman with a green juice, living her best life, #best life, in perfect clothes. And I've never really wanted to be in that space. It's never, even in my young years, it still made me feel a little bit like, oh, and although it kind of, and saying that, obviously, as a white woman, it's an interesting one. But I think for me, the problem with the wellness industry is it's become so focused on individualism and self-care as the premise, and self-perfection as well. This continuous drive to be better, to be more, and good vibes only, and all of that kind of energy that just doesn't sit well with me. And I think that's why I've always really pulled back from it. I'm like, oh, it makes me cringe ultimately. And then I'm sure we'll talk about it, but obviously over the last year, and the wellness industry being pretty much silent when there's live streamed genocides and a polycrisis occurring in the world, and looking around and literally feeling like screaming into the void of, like, how can we be advocating for wellness when you're clearly only advocating for wellness for one type of person. Or we can't be well. We cannot be well as a society. We cannot be well as individuals if the world is burning and we're not going to address that. We're not going to discuss it. And so it's just been, and I know you've been the same, it's just been this really rage and frustration, and like, how can people keep on showing up, selling what they're selling without even like a side glance to what's happening in the world? And I think that's where everything really needs to change, is how can the wellness industry come to be using our skills? Like, we've got such an incredible skill set, people in the wellness industry, skills that are needed in this world right now. So how can it become this advocating for everybody rather than just the people that can afford it? And the wellness coaches, I've had to unfollow. So over the years, I've unfollowed so many coaches that are like, oh, come and get your 6-figure month and your 6-figure course. And it just all makes me feel really quite sick.
Totally. One of my angry notes in my phone was about exactly what you just said, which I might try to find some way to communicate when the vitriol just dies down. But no, I can resonate so much with what you've just said. And I really feel, a little bit late to the party, but like over the last year, my definition of what being well, it's really shifted, totally shifted. And because in the past, my idea of being well was very much around this green juice, working through my stuff and taking care of myself, and all of our kind of wellnessy paradigm of what wellness is. And I think over the last year, the disparity of that became even bigger when you're flashing on your reels and one picture of people being bombed and children being pulled out of buildings, and then the next one is someone trying to sell me a skin product, and like someone trying to sell me this juice company. And it's been so dystopian for me that I feel like that really magnified the inherent issues with our definitions around being well. And I feel like for me, and I wrote this in a post the other day, that actually it feels for me like my version of being right now is actually questioning all of that, because I feel very much that I'm in this place of still asking questions. I feel like I've got more questions than solutions right now. And I think actually that's totally where a lot of people are. But actually being in that place of questioning what is mainstream is actually my version of being well right now.
Yeah, no, I fully agree. And I think as well, it's like now my being well practices, regulating myself and coming into my body is even more important than ever, because we have to be in our bodies. We have to be as regulated as we possibly can be in this dysregulated world so that we can show up. And I think that's what it's become for me, is, okay, I'm trying to be as well as I can so that I can show up, rather than, oh, I'm going to be the best version of me, and these are going to be my New Year's resolutions. And everything just feels so false now. I think for me, it's been such a big journey over the last year, because I personally, shamefully, but I know I'm not alone, didn't know anything about Palestine before October the 7th. Nothing. And it's been such a wild year of learning, of unlearning, of recognizing the years, like the lifetime of conditioning that's been put upon me, us as a collective, on Arab men, Arabs as a whole, Muslims, to the point of even thinking about things that I've watched in the past, series that I've watched, like everything has come into question, and it's been like the biggest, most painful awakening and I have just been trying my best to learn as much as I can and unlearn as much as I can. And interestingly, it all seemed to coincide with giving up alcohol as well. So I've had this year of pure clarity, which has been wild, because it's suddenly realizing that everything isn't as it seems. And then looking around you, like you say, and seeing still now people just continuing as if nothing's happening, as if everything's okay. And I'm just like, for me, as a teacher, as a human being, I cannot operate anywhere other than from my heart. And for me, I started being quite vocal, but I was always vocal about, like, years and years ago when the refugee crisis started to happen. I was hugely vocal about that. I do lots of charity classes in London because that is who I am. Like, I cannot see something and feel something and then not speak about it in my teaching, in who I am. So it's been a natural progression that, of course, I'm going to talk about what's happening. Of course, I'm going to do what I can. And then looking around and go, but how are other people not? And trying to understand that without feeling nothing but rage. And I've called it out a few times. And I think the hardest thing for me has been seeing people with huge platforms just say absolutely nothing.
Yeah, totally. And it astonishes me how, and I used to be part of this, so I say this with no condemnation, but I used to not be interested in world politics. I used to not want to engage with the news because it was low vibrational. It was all about, I was in the whole like love and light, let's bring in the high vibes type thing. But with everything that we've been witnessing, I've just been astounded how we can still conceive that wellness is outside of global issues, and my understanding of how actually that is so inextricably linked, because it can't just be a certain demographic of people can become more well, but actually let's just casually ignore everybody else's well-being. And because well-being is so interrelated between race, between oppression, with white supremacy, with socioeconomic disparity, and all of these things. And I find it crazy that it has been made into this different whole arena. And I learned recently, I saw a post the other day, how in Ontario in Canada, if you're a psychotherapist, it's written into your kind of code of ethics that you are supposed to take part in social justice. That was amazing. I'll send you the post. It was so interesting to me. But I was like, of course, that makes sense.
Of course.
Totally. And also how I also learned recently how yoga and social justice used to be part of the same thing. But I'd never heard that before, which is amazing that I've literally in the last year discovered that. Had you heard of that from the beginning of your training? Maybe you had?
No, not from the beginning, not at all. And going back to the very beginning, I was all very much, I remember the teacher that I had at the time, all of her emails would be signed off love and light. And so I came very much from that kind of, and it is, I look at that now, knowing what I know in present time, and not at all shaming it in any way, because it's just where the yoga world was. But it's ultimately spiritual bypassing, which is ultimately, when we really look at it, dissociative behavior, isn't it? It's like, it's exiting your body and pretending that
which is very ironic, really, for people who claim to be grounded, embodied, regulated, empathetic, compassionate. When we look at it through that lens, it's quite problematic.
It's really problematic, and it makes no sense, because if we look at yoga in the very essence of what yoga really means and is, beyond the Western kind of understanding of just the asana practice and the physical practice, it's oneness, it's unity, it's the continuity, the connection of everything, the web of the whole. And as someone that shares the philosophy of yoga, it's like, how can we not address the whole, the web of the whole, because we are all so intrinsically linked. What happens to one happens to everybody. And so for me, that is yoga. Yoga is activism. It's recognition of our oneness and how everything's going to affect everybody. And so for people to not then recognize that, it just feels strange to me. We're in a strange time.
Yeah, totally. I would love to ask you how you navigate this within the yoga space, or how you feel about this, because from my sense, and again, this is only really something that I have started to fully consider within the last couple of years, of the whitewashing of the yoga world. Actually, if you kind of Google on Instagram yoga, you'll see the white classic Lululemon thing. And I know that people who I have spoken to, whether that is teachers, students, people of color, really see that actually yoga has been made into this kind of white space. How do you navigate that as a teacher?
Yeah, I mean, it's such a tricky one, isn't it? And obviously, as a white woman that has taught yoga for many years, I've perpetuated that, I'm sure, over the years and have been part of that washing in some way. And when I taught for the majority of my career in East London, so it was a very kind of mixed stretch, had amazing roomfuls of all colours, all genders. It was really amazing. So I did notice when I moved down here, actually, that it did feel quite different.
Yeah.
And that's been something I've been trying to work on myself as someone who co-founded the studio. I'm like, okay, how can we get that down here? And it might not look the same, but how can we do better? But it's years and years of the wellness industry taking yoga and creating an image of yoga that isn't what it is. And I think that's where the cultural appropriation comes in, and the fact that we've taken these incredible practices that we've benefited so beautifully from. And the forefathers of yoga, they brought it here and they wanted the West to have yoga. And I think that's such a beautiful gift that we've received. And then obviously the West has taken it and it's changed. And I personally believe everything's meant to evolve. So I think the yoga, physical asana practice of yoga, that's meant to evolve and it's meant to change. And if we look at the roots of the practices when they came to the West, there was so many different types. There was some gymnastics put in. It wasn't yoga, and when we look at the asana, it isn't what traditional yoga was. If we look back thousands and thousands of years, they weren't doing a perfectly aligned warrior two. They were meditating and breathing. So the physical practice is meant to evolve, but the fact that the practices have been taken and then completely whitewashed is shameful, really. And I think all I can say on that is, as practitioners, as teachers, certainly as someone who co-owns a studio, is, okay, how can we address this and how can we make as much change as possible, so that I'm so passionate about flow state being somewhere that everybody, no matter what colour, what race, what gender they are, they come and they feel safe. And there's still work to do there. And I'm doing that work in the background to really try and get into the communities that I need to speak to. And what do we need to do? I'm asking, like you say earlier, like I'm asking questions. I don't have the answers. As a white woman, I'm trying to go to people of colour and say, what would make you feel like you can come here? Why aren't your people coming here? What can we do? And I've had some incredible, I was part of Brighton Wellness Festival talk, which was fantastic. Made some beautiful connections there. And since then, I've spoken to an amazing teacher, Indy, who she does incredible work with women of colour. She does classes specifically for women of colour. So I've spoken to her. I'm like, okay, how can flow state be a space that you can bring that to? We'll give you the space for free, bring that in, let people know that we're here and that it's a place that they can be. And so I'm just trying to do as much as I can to, over time, to change it, to make it more accessible, to make sure that we are doing what we can ultimately with our white privilege to make yoga what it's meant to be, which is a practice. It used to be a practice for Asian men. It wasn't a practice for white women. So it's quite wild. I had a student the other day who came in and he got, again, there's more women than men in our classes. And even that, I'm trying to okay, the guys, let's get the guys in. And he was like, commented on being like one of three men in the class. And I was like, but isn't it wild that it used to be a dominantly male practice? Women didn't do the practice when back in the day. So how it's completely changed to this white woman practice is quite wild.
I'm curious on that journey of you asking questions, trying to become more inclusive, diverse, accessible within your practice, within your studio. Has that journey felt easy for you, or has it felt complex? Has it felt gritty? Has it felt messy, imperfect, saying the wrong things, doing the wrong things? How's that been for you?
It is, I think, as a white woman, having those conversations is really uncomfortable. And I'll own it. I'll absolutely own it. And it's something the terror of saying the wrong thing, or just putting yourself out there and saying something wrong or upsetting someone accidentally, and that all sits there. But you've got to hold that discomfort and do it anyway. And when I'm having these conversations, I'm always saying, absolutely going to get something wrong. I think that's one of the most important things that we start to recognize as we go on these difficult journeys and have these difficult conversations is we are probably going to get things wrong. But I believe that if we're coming from a really authentic place and we're really trying our best to do better, hopefully that when we do get something wrong, I'll always say, tell me if I've got anything wrong. And we have on my teacher training, I have the amazing Georgie Francesca. I don't know Georgie. She's half Sri Lankan. She comes in and she teaches a whole workshop for my students on cultural appropriation versus appreciation. I thought it was such an important conversation to have on a foundation level training. I want any teachers that I train to be going out there trying to be the ones that are making a difference and a change and not just perpetuating what's already there. And when she came in and did this workshop, it was amazing. And she opened it up with, this is going to feel uncomfortable. This is going to feel really sticky, and it's okay. We had a shake and we made that space, and she created that space for us all to go, okay, we're going to get things wrong. And ultimately, after the 3-hour kind of discussion, we came to the conclusion that as a white person teaching yoga, you are going to be culturally appropriating. You just are. No matter what you do, how you do it, you will be culturally appropriating. And so, okay, let's own that. Yeah. So how do we honor the roots? How do we create more accessible places for people? How can we take this fact that we have inherited or taken this incredible practice, changed it, made it our own? How can we honor where it's come from? Most of all, bring it back so that it's a place that feels accessible for everyone. And that's what I'm really passionate about. It's, okay, how can we use this privilege and take this amazing practice that we've gained and changed and make sure that we're making a difference with it? Because I think it's such an incredible practice that's changed so many people's lives, yours and mine probably as well as some of them. And so taking that with gratitude and letting it shift and be the amorphous ball that it has been over many years, centuries, and allow that to continue to shift whilst holding on to the very essence that is yoga. For me, that is union, oneness with yourself, with everybody else, and carry that into a more accessible space.
Yeah, totally. Oh my goodness, there's so much that I want to speak to that I'm holding in my head and like trying to segment it out. But no, some things are coming up for me when you were talking about the being in the discomfort, firstly, of when you're trying to lean into accessibility and inclusivity as a white person, and the complexity and the challenge, the discomfort of that. I think that for me has been really big of how can I continue to hold that capacity of discomfort for myself? And actually, if I'm not feeling uncomfortable, then perhaps I'm not dipping into the next layer of that. So I feel like it's that getting comfortable within the discomfort of it has become like a big practice for me, but also really trying to flip. So this has been very helpful for me. We all have different stories and woundings and stuff. And one of my things is about getting things wrong. I'm a perfectionist, never want to get anything wrong, don't want to insult anybody, don't want to put a toe out of line. Rocking the boat has been a big thing for me. But I really tried to flip that round. Instead of I say something challenging, harmful, and someone says, actually, that what you've said is difficult, because instead of me then internalizing, I've done something wrong, tried to flip that to be like, thank you for letting me know that, because now I've identified that and I'm not going to continue to do that anymore. That's been a big flip for me, like as a space holder, as a practitioner, coach, even, and in these podcast conversations as well. That's been very helpful for me. And then I was also, something else that was coming up for me was really what you were speaking to. I see a lot online of people saying people in the West shouldn't even be teaching yoga, and that being a question out in the space. But then I also really align with what you've said around, but actually people brought yoga to the West because there's so much healing that needs to happen here. So I guess it is that balance of recognizing that we need these practices, that they are helpful for us. They've been life-changing for both of us, as you said. But then how do we maintain that reverence for these practices? And I love what you were saying there, that actually we are appropriating. Just by practicing yoga, we are appropriating. So then how do we balance that and not do it in respectful ways? So I'm just curious on that. Are there things that you do now as a studio owner and teacher that how would you speak to that kind of appropriation for yourself now?
For me, I think the biggest thing that I try and do, accepting the fact that I will be appropriating as a Black woman teaching yoga, sharing yoga teacher trainings, is I try and make sure that I keep up with my studies. I'm always studying philosophy and really trying to get to and honouring the roots of the kind of philosophical side of the practice and bring that into my teaching. So even though I've gone on a very big journey to a more embodied, inquiry-based practice, the philosophy of yoga is even more inherent in that embodied practice of the oneness. And so that's one thing. But I guess what I've looked at, aside from staying really educated and continuously questioning as well, why am I saying that? What are the roots of that? Does that make sense? I personally, I use Sanskrit interchangeably with English, and I know, and I use Sanskrit because it's a beautiful language and it's part of the heritage and that beautiful richness of the roots of yoga. And I know, again, that there's varying discussions on that. But I remember there were studios in London years ago that they wouldn't let their teachers use any Sanskrit. They wouldn't let them say namaste at the end. And then I think that for me is more appropriation than maintaining some of that beautiful rich heritage that is in the languaging and the philosophy. Is when you take all of that out, it's not yoga anymore. So it's like keeping that in and teaching it from my heart in my way, from the learnings that I've done. But then for me, it's very much, if we are going to be appropriating by being white people sharing yoga, how can we ensure that we are accessible and inclusive within that, and making that my way in which to, okay, I accept and I'm honouring the roots, and I want to make sure that people of colour feel safe in my classes and in my spaces. And that's been the journey for me, is, okay, that's the work for me, is, okay, how do I do that? And that's where I've been. So like I said, bringing that in and trying to do my best with that side of things, because I think all of the reading I've done about appropriating and all of the kind of work that I've done around it for myself, everybody has their own journey with it. And I think what I tell all of my students, and what Georgie sort of said in her appropriation workshop, is we just have to keep on questioning everything we say, everything we do. Why are we teaching that? What does that mean? And finding the space where we feel that we are honouring the roots. And it's just different for everybody. And I'm always just trying to stay on top of really being with myself and why I'm teaching something. Yeah.
And I imagine that we both live in Brighton and Hove, which is, I guess, the capital of the UK of gay and trans communities. Is that something that you also try to accommodate at the studio? How have you considered that in terms of accessibility as well?
That's a really big one. Again, I've got lots of, when I was in London, we had lots of, when I was teaching as part of Stretch, we had a number of amazing trans students come and do our teacher trainings. What was brilliant about that is I learned so much, really spending time and diving deep. And this is where I really started to learn, even just from not saying, oh, hi ladies, or presuming anything. Like, I started to really learn about that side of things. And that is something we've done in the past. So we've had one of my trans students was going to come down and teach a class just for trans people around Pride. We had a workshop for trans people that was going to be around Pride. So we're trying to do lots of stuff around that as well. We do have quite a mix within the community at the moment, which is great. And I do think that's because a huge amount of the teachers that teach have trained with me. And again, I do a lot around languaging and making sure that we're creating inclusive spaces through the language that we use, because I think it can often be so alienating when we are using language. We don't even realise that could be offensive or othering. But there's still loads more. I always say, me and Deanne have these conversations all the time. Deanne's my business partner, about we're in the gay capital. We should have 50% at least of our community who are gay, lesbian, trans. And we're not there yet, but we are passionately, continuously, always trying to find new ways to bring people in.
Yeah.
And to make sure it's a safe space.
Mm. Beautiful. And, you know, something that I really see in your studio, and I'm actually really looking forward to coming to Flow State for more classes, because we're moving literally like in a few weeks closer to home, which will be great. But I was looking at I get your newsletters, and something that I see that you do a lot of, which I love, is also like fundraising and classes, and all donations are given to, I know that you've got one coming up, which is to All Your Relations, which is those who haven't heard of it, it's a charity that fundraises for Gaza families. And I know that's really interwoven with so much of your studio practices, which I guess for somebody like myself that is interested, and I know you are as well, interested within these topics and see that kind of marriage of yoga and social justice, or being in social justice, that also makes me feel safe within the space as well. And that seems to be really important for you as a studio.
It's a huge one for us. Yeah, it's a huge one for us. And I feel really proud of what we've done to this point. There's still so much more that we want to do. But I think, I can't remember exactly when it was, probably the beginning of the year, we did a big fundraiser for medical aid for Palestine. I think we were one of the first places that I know that did anything, actually, when everything unfolded. And we've done a huge amount of Choose Love. I'm just going to do some shameless plugs now. I've got my TRE workshop coming up next Sunday, which is All for All Our Relations, which is a charity that was co-founded by a friend of mine who is working on the ground. Yeah, she knows people on the ground. She's raising money for families there. I did an online class as well, raised nearly £1,000 for them in May. It's, for me and Deanne, we both just, whenever we feel hopeless, we move to action. It's like, okay, we cannot be in despair. It doesn't serve anybody. So what can we do? And so we're just constantly going, okay, what's next? How can we be in any way making a small bit of difference? And that has been the only way that we've been felt able to authentically show up. Is actually, okay, on Black Friday, we're doing Give Back Friday instead. So all of the proceeds for that day are going to go to War Child. We've all just created a team that are going to run Brighton Half Marathon next year, and we're doing that for War Child as well. So we're doing as much as we can at the moment, and that will continue, just because it's inherently part of who we are. And as a business, we just think it's so important to be giving back. And yeah, it's just, we couldn't not do it.
Yeah, amazing. And I guess that it leads me on to a question of, what would you love to see more of within the yoga and wellness space? And I know that's probably vast as well, because the list is endless, but what comes to mind for you?
More authenticity, more heart-led practices, more embodiment, more social justice, more realness. But I think just to see wellness practitioners, people in the wellness, advocating for all rather than a small amount that can afford a high price point. I think that's the biggest thing for me. But more advocacy, more social justice, more passion, more authenticity. I think the whole of the industry just needs to be shaken and realigned to something that feels like it's actually going to serve the world at large rather than a handful of people. And I do believe slowly the scales are tipping. There are more and more people like us having these conversations and realizing that actually you can only really think of yourself for so long before you realize that everything affects you. Yeah. And there's so many skills that we could all bring together, and there's so much that we can do as communities to heal both each other, ourselves, but also the collective. And I think that's really where it needs to go.
Yeah. I love that. Just building on what you've just said, I really feel like there is so much space for wellness yoga practitioners just within like local communities. It doesn't have to be this kind of grand global gesture of, and then we're in a difficult area of going into our savior complex with our wellness skills.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
but actually just like reaching out to like local organizations and local area, because I think that I'm certainly starting to see more movements like that, how we can bring more accessible, inclusive, diverse access to our local communities as well. So I suppose, yeah, that was what was coming through for me listening to what you were saying as well for yoga and wellness practitioners.
And I think healing can only happen in community, can't it? It doesn't happen as a singular person, like just me on my little island healing myself. It's like true healing happens in communities. And so I think that's where we need to get back to. It's at the heart of our communities. And I say it in all of my classes, whenever I teach, even just an hour's class, we set an intention at the end of the practice rather than the beginning now, because I want people to go, how can I carry this feeling that I've got, this intention that I've created, this oneness, this love, whatever it might be that I've cultivated for myself within this community, within this room. The practice then starts when you walk out the door for me. So we've just cultivated this amazing energy, but now the practice starts. How are you going to let this drip feed out into the way in which you are in the world, your interactions, your actions? And I think the more that we think like that, the more powerful it'll become. It's not that 1 hour of, oh, I've done my yoga for me and I'm feeling wonderful, thanks. I always say, now the practice begins, go out there and take yoga into the world. Yeah. Whether you're a teacher or not, like everybody can do that. Going out and seeing how that then, every interaction that we have will ripple out, change that person to it becomes a global interaction, doesn't it? Because we're also intrinsically linked.
Totally. I love that. And because something that you hear a lot in yoga class or you see online is like yoga happens off the mat. But actually, I certainly didn't used to think about taking my practice out into the world and that being where it actually starts. So yeah, I love you bringing that into the conversation. Thank you. I just wanted to ask one more question around, for anybody that is listening to this that is feeling inspired to take their teaching, their coaching, their practices further in all the ways that we've been describing, are there any resources or like anything that you would recommend, anything that has been inspiring you, people, books, anything that comes to mind for that?
I guess it's going and following the people who are the real voices of the truth that's coming through, finding the last remaining people who oppress. I would highly recommend anyone that has the time and space getting involved with maybe helping or advocating for one family in Gaza. That's been something that can be really profound and life-changing for people. I would definitely recommend that people look up All Our Relations. They are doing great work, and they're also continuously looking for volunteers to help just to support and speak to the people that they're working with. And I do believe that anyone out there that's feeling just overwhelmed with it all, go gently, but do go in. And action really does help you feel less helpless. And action doesn't need to be huge, and it's just taking tiny steps to be engaged and educated, and in some way, shape or form using the privilege that we have, which is currently living in a safe home and a safe life. And so taking that into the world in any way that you can.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you so much, Calli. This has been amazing.
My love.
Is there anything else that you want to share?
Just, yeah, if anyone's local, please do come down to all of our charity fundraising events. There's one more that I would love just to say. We've got this incredible event on the 30th of November. I'm not sure if this will be out by then, but if it is, then great, because we've got this amazing Pre-Love for Purpose fundraiser where we've got a group of amazing women in Hove who've come together all with a shared passion for needing to do something. And we're going to be having a big close sale, a big raffle. All proceeds are going to Save the Children at Flow State. So it'd be amazing. We want to make that a roaring success. And we also have a gathering on the 6th, which is going to be raising money for War Child. And just come and be in the space with us and share time and space. And yeah, let's all try and do what we can.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Calli, and all of your info will be in the show notes and everything for anyone who wants to connect with you. So thank you so much for your time. It's been an amazing episode. So yeah, thank you so much. I hope that you enjoyed that episode with Calli. If you or someone you know are local to Hove UK and you or they want to practice at Flow State, but finances have always acted as a barrier, Flow State now offers a sliding scale of payment on all of its workshops. They also have a community class, which is £6, and offer 20% off to any concessions. Calli also offers 2 bursary spots on her yoga and movement teacher trainings, aimed at encouraging those from marginalised groups or identities into the arena of yoga teaching. So if this is something that you or someone you know could be interested in, feel free to get in touch with Calli directly via the information in the episode show notes. Thank you for listening. It's great to have you with me on this journey towards higher love for all. Our time is our greatest commodity and gift, so thanks for investing it in yourself and sharing it with me. Please do take a moment to rate and review the show, all of which enables more people to find me and for me to connect with more great guests each week for both yours and my enjoyment. All links, references and contact information is detailed too within the show notes. And I always love to hear your feedback, so feel free to hit me up on my Instagram at higherlove_with_Megan, or via my website, higher-love.com. Send your takeaways, and if you enjoyed this episode, please share or send on to someone else who would benefit. Until next time, big love.